Disney's latest Star Wars streaming series, Ahsoka, has come to a close with its final episode. The timing of this, in terms of reviews, was impeccable, being only a day after the finale of Only Murders in the Building, leaving me with the impossible choice: review the best thing to come out of streaming, or suffer the worst. Sorry, Martin and Martin, but I'll have to come back to you. The only problem now is, where do I begin? Because Ahsoka seems to retain its title as the worst thing to come out of Disney Star Wars. But how can that be, considering the series was written and overseen by the pupil of George Lucas himself, Dave Filoni? Unfortunately, with Ahsoka, he proves that he is just not the right man for this particular job. Now, it's not to diminish any of his accomplishments in animation. However, producing a film or series for live action is a whole different animal, and for Dave, the skills just did not transfer. So let's talk about the key issues that plagued Ahsoka, brought on by a lack of understanding of the needs of live action versus those of animation, and see just went wrong. While the differences in audience is not quite so black and white, in general, cartoons and animations are made for younger audiences, and live-action films and series are for older audiences. And while there's certainly plenty of crossover between the two, this generally is still true. And because of this, the mediums are split in their approach by their use of subtlety. Where film and television will utilize slight shifts in light values and color palettes, animation will generally rely more on brighter, more primary colors. Expressions in actors' performances that normally attempt to reflect reality as closely as possible are ramped up into over-exaggerated performances. And writing that, when it's well done, can convey information and emotion seamlessly, is stripped down to its bare essentials and oversimplified, kind of spoon-feeding its audience so that nothing is missed. One medium's approach to subtlety isn't better or worse than the other. They're just different. They're made to suit the needs of their respective audiences, and because of that, they don't necessarily work well when mixed. So first, let's look at that writing. Ahsoka begins with a transport ship carrying a deadly prisoner, receiving a message from two supposed Jedi. The captain sees through the deception, but decides to invite them on board anyway and calls them out on their bluff, to which the two then murder everyone and take back their prisoner. It's got to be one of the most unrealistic opening scenes ever made. The two villains' ruse is so paper thin that they would have been more convincing had they shown up in a flying wooden horse. The captain's decisions were so idiotic that I still kind of think he was actually secretly part of the bad guys' crew, maybe as a plant to allow them on board, and maybe his whole death was staged. After all, he was only stabbed by a lightsaber, so he probably did live after that. It's the sort of contrived, oversimplified scenario that just isn't believable in live action, but it would be perfect in a cartoon. You can practically even hear the characters saying to one another,
"You're going to have to stop that." Stop what? Talking to strangers. It's just not a good idea.
But this show is about Ahsoka and the Rebels, so let's take a look at what situations they get into and how they handle them. The through line for all of them is contradiction. Hera finds herself in a constant rebellion, if you will, disobeying direct commands and orders from her superiors, while also demanding everyone else follow her orders. Sabine blindly follows around Ahsoka in the search for Ezra and promises she'll do anything for her master, while simultaneously only ever acting on her own impulsive whims. And Ahsoka, who is supposedly the mentor figure, spends the entire series just flying by the seat of her pants. And not out of trust in the Force, mind you, but just hyperactively doing whatever comes into her head. Enemy fighters approaching? Why not just jump out and fight them with lightsabers? Lose a ship you were tracking? Just jump inside a giant space whale. Lose a fight with a bad guy? Well, you don't have to win in order to win. However, the show is only as good as its villain, and Ahsoka has Thrawn. So, how was he handled?
Withdraw the fighter. Contact the fighter group and have them re-engage the opponent. Recall the gunships. Call off the area of pursuit. In the grand scheme of things, one might even call this first match with Tano a success.
Now let's take a look at how Dave handles the task of directing. Ahsoka has several directors, and most of them have a handful of TV directing credits to their name with only an episode or two per show, which is fine, and not bad in terms of their career. But it shows that, in essence, they're hired guns to come in and relieve the pressure from the show creators for an episode or two, not taking any real creative freedoms of their own. Basically, instead of having a broad canvas to work with, they're handed paint-by-number books. And Dave Filoni and Kathleen Kennedy are the ones handing out the books, so we can't really lay any of the faults on the other directors of the show. Now let's look at Dave Filoni's episodes. He directed episodes 1 and 5, and looking at them, we can see his shortcomings in moving away from animation and into directing. When it comes to directing, contrary to popular belief, it's less about getting the exact shots that you have in your head, that's left to the cinematographer, and more about staging, blocking, and pulling the best performances out of the actors. It's good to think of it in terms of theater. Where do you choose to place your actors and objects on the stage? And how do you get your actors to give the right performances? The exact placement and temperature of the lights, the precise camera focal length, those are all determined by the cinematographer, which, when working in unison with your camera crew, you'll get the best final image. Filoni just doesn't seem to know how to place his actors, and generally just kind of shoves them in the image in groups, or stages them unrealistically far apart for reunions or standoffs. There's no nuance or subtlety to his blocking or staging, showing the limitations he brings coming from animation, which isn't helped by the over-reliance on the volume screen for his set pieces, clearly showing actors standing against LED panels. There's no depth in the shots, either from the lighting or the camera, with the actors just all lumped together in front of the volume lit only by the LED panels. He seems, however, to have taken a radically different approach in coaching his actors, forcing out only the flattest, dullest, most unexpressive performances possible, perhaps as an overcorrection for the over-the-top cartoonish performances that are most common in animation. There's no subtlety, only monotone performances that are flat and completely unrealistic to how people really talk. Unless, of course, you're a cameraman making YouTube reviews. In addition to their dialogue, there's simply no passion or energy given to their physical performances, especially with the fight scenes, which always begin with a long, pensive stare before the showdown, which, after the 5th or 6th time, just loses its luster. Even in the samurai films that inspired Star Wars, they don't square up and look at each other this often. When they do finally fight, it's like a school dance team's production of a Star Wars fight, and everyone's holding their lightsabers the wrong way. Overall, it seems to me that the problems the Ahsoka series have faced have all stemmed from its very creator. Looking for the perfect movie in time for the Halloween season? Well, I've got a review to die for.
In the grand scheme of things, one might even call this a success.